I'm absolutely delighted to have you guys here. We just spent 10 minutes backstage, and my mind is already completely blown. We have a lot to talk about. Let's start with just creating a framework for everyone, because I think we're going to go down a lot of different paths tonight. We're talking about meditation tonight. Let's just put that in some kind of framework for folks that may have never practiced, that are here tonight. And because I think that we have these visions of what that means. You know, you're picturing the long bearded guy with like the pretzeled legs and that whole thing. But what are we talking about tonight?
You want to take that one?
I thought we were talking about the bearded guy with the pretzel legs.
All right, I'm obviously the wrong room.
Okay,
I thought I was here to watch Barbie.
Here,
I don't know.
that's what I was. Do you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, something that Jeff and I talk about a lot, and for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are teachers from different lineages and combine a lot of different teachings, but we also host a podcast called the Consciousness Explorers Podcast, where this is essentially what we're trying to get to the bottom of. You know, we have guests on that all come from different traditions, from religious traditions to secular traditions, body movement, voice, meditation, mindfulness, hypnosis, all sorts of stuff, and trying to get to like what the common element is there. Because I think, there is a lot of people who are interested in meditation. It sounds cool. People who do it seem to be really chill. But then you try it and it's hard and you're like, this is not for me. And you kind of just throw the baby out with the bathwater. So something that we focus on is practice. So not even necessarily meditation, because that's a form of practice, a practice of awareness, of consciousness, of, being more centered, all those good words, right? But there's so many different ways in. So I think that's what we're talking about today, is to kind of demystify meditation a little bit, to find something that works for you, for your nervous system, for your life, and kind of just sampling what that can look like, from meditation, from very formal meditation with pretzel legs, to dancing, ecstatic dance, or drawing practices, or whatever that might look like for you, and getting to the core of what really comes out in these practices.
Yeah, well said. The idea that there's all these different paths and all these different practices that can take us somewhere, though. But the question is, where do they take us? And I think that's kind of the heart of what meditation is about, is that there's a place in the center of our life. There's a place that we're living from that we're often not consciously connected to, that we're inside our worries, our stories, we're being buffeted by situations, and yet there's a kind of raw capacity for presence and awareness that is already operating, that is already there, that is who you are. And meditation begins to make that, sometimes very suddenly, sometimes over a longer, more slow-cooked, gradual path, that starts to become ever more apparent. And as that becomes more apparent, for myself, I could say I feel like it's locating me ever more into the middle of my life. I'm more present and available in a very natural, easy way for more kinds of intensities of situations. Like, and where previously I would go off in something where I'd be lost over here or worried about this, like I can stay there, I can see the intensity come up and go down, and I feel more. Because of that, I feel like I'm able to be more present and connected to more people and more things. So my life gets broader and wider. And eventually, as you go, so it's sort of like you're learning how to be kind of present and available to life in this very simple, natural way. It's not exotic. It's the opposite of exotic. And yet, the more you do that, whatever practice your way in, whether it's through a seated practice, which does have a value because it's so simple, you start to, like, you have a hard time. It's simple but not easy. But it's easier you can't fool yourself with that practice if you're just floating off in space versus if you're actually there. Whereas other practices can be great ways in, but sometimes you can also override the insights because you're just busy doing your other fun stuff and whatever it is. So we can talk about that. We can talk about the different ways you can get into it. But what it is being right here.
Yeah.
Being right here.
And the different methods of getting.
And being ever more right here. And at a certain point, you realize being right here is, the ordinary is pretty extraordinary. Mm-hmm. Really extraordinary. Really extraordinary. And really extraordinary. It's like, then I don't have to be any one way. I can do this. I can go like this. I can stand up. I can just start to recite Hamlet. Who cares? I mean, the possibilities of what you can do in your life are basically almost infinite, but you have all of this conditioning that's telling you what you can or can't do. So this kind of intuitive spontaneity and freshness can start to emerge into things, and it's the best. Basically.
Give us some, and I'd love you to maybe illustrate that with some guided meditation at some point. But before we get there, just give us a snapshot of how you found yourself at the doorway to this understanding, because you come from different backgrounds. You've got very unique lives prior to this whole journey. So just give us a sense of how you found this pursuit.
How'd you find it?
Well, it's one of those weird things where once I didn't go to my first retreat until like 20 years ago, and I was writing a book about consciousness, and I felt like I had to have it was like different approaches and ways of thinking about different states of consciousness. It was about dreaming and sleeping and hypnosis and lucid dreaming, and like, I need a chapter on meditation. So I'll just throw one chapter in there, because meditation is like a little subject, and I'll just put that little subject in there with a little synopsis, and boy, was I ever deluded.
20 years later.
So it's like 20 years later. First of all, it completely changed my life. So that was 20 years ago, going on my first retreat and starting to get a taste of it myself. But then when you start to do it, you realize, oh, this is something that I've actually known my whole life. That when I was young, just being a little kid, if anyone's ever had the experience of being like, what the heck's going on here? Meaning reality. Like, I exist. You're just suddenly walking around like, what is my life? What is this thing? I mean, has anyone ever had that wonder or feeling of or just sort of been like, what the heck's going on? Or like, it just that kind of that, I've been doing that since I was a kid. And meditation kind of takes away the part of you that was taking everything for granted. And so you realize, oh, that practice was happening. And so I did a retreat, and I really liked it. It was helping with my ADHD and all my craziness, and never a billion years thought I'd ever teach it, but I liked it so much. I had a teacher who was like, hey, you gotta start telling, sharing it with people, and then that's just and then it just became my whole life. So that's the story.
For me, I was like very young, and always had a rebellious streak. So, I was into punk music. I was a rapper. I mean, I still am. I'm a musician, and, stage diving and kind of just like seeking the thrill. And I was having all these crazy experiences like in middle school, spontaneous kind of like what I now know to be like a out of body experience, which I couldn't make sense of, and kind of spontaneous meditation and stuff. And so in that way of chasing the high, I was like, how do I get more of this weird stuff? And I fell down a rabbit hole of researching, but I didn't realize meditation or practice was a thing until I moved away from home and graduated high school. And then I thought, let's just go to a Zen center, which I think a lot of us are familiar with. It's kind of the quintessential thing we think about when we think of meditation, like a Zen master, right? So I was like, obviously this must be the place. And I really tried to stick with it. And I found it so austere, and this is nothing against Zen, because Zen is an excellent practice if it's for you. I found it so austere that I kind of just dropped out and continued with my music career and, touring the world. And then things happen in your life. You run up against obstacles, you have breakups, a project that you wanted to work fails, or you lose a ton of money, or you lose some friends, and then you're like, the things that I've built in my life are not answering the questions at this level. So I thought, let's give this another shot. And this time I went and tried out some of the Indo-Tibetan traditions, and I fell in love with Tibetan traditions because there's tantra, there's visualization meditations, there's movement, there's a lot of color, and I was like, it felt like the rebellious kind of meditation, and I had no idea that even existed. So I fell down that rabbit hole, and that was like, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. Found many amazing teachers, and then it's kind of same as Jeff, my teacher was like, when are you going to start teaching? And that, I don't think anyone ever feels ready for that. And I was like, I'm going to screw up anyone that I try to teach. And she said, then that's the path, So in the Tibetan tradition, I'm what's called a lama, which is basically just a teacher, but also just try and pick up any modality that can help somebody, because everybody has a different gateway to meditation or practice.
And I think you both touched upon this. One of the big kind of pitfalls, maybe not a pitfall, but a tendency that happens when you're in this study is that you study more than you practice.
Oh, yeah.
Like you become so
Totally.
fascinated, you want to talk about it with somebody, and you're sharing your pieces. But then when you're walking by your meditation, you're like, got to do those 10 minutes like some point today.
Yeah.
Could we do something just to give people a taste? And I think for anyone that's already has a practice or this might be your first time, this would be a good just entry point, and then we can kind of discuss more.
Cool.
I was thinking maybe a 10-minute meditation. And first of all, anybody never
5.
meditated before? Anyone never meditated in their life? Cool.
Does anyone have what they would consider a regular practice?
regular practice?
Oh, we got some people. Okay, show of hands, 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Hands up for a 5-minute practice. 5. Hands up for a 10.
Oh, you're
Oh,
outvoted.
sorry.
Don't worry, I'll make it.
You got outvoted.
I'll make
Okay,
it
we're doing
seamless.
10. Yes,
Or
it'll be
rather,
fun.
I mean, not seamless.
He's very
painless.
fun.
I'll
Very
make
fun.
it painless.
We're all together. We're all in it together. So
So maybe just to set up ahead of time, the thing we were kind of pointing to at the beginning, even Tasha even kind of talked about it a little bit in her story, is, you know, in your life, you're always just trying to get it just right. It's like, if I get this thing, this will get figured out, or I got to get this variable over here, or I got to make sure that amazing music doesn't completely drown out my voice and become more interesting than, okay, that kind of thing. But where you're always trying to control the variables of your life, or you get into a moment where there's a lull, and then you're like, I don't really want to be with myself, so I got to fill it up this way. I got to, that's the mind. The mind's always jump and jump, 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 jump. So initially, when you begin a meditation, that's often the experience. You're getting invited into a space where you can just sit and be, and the meditation person may prompt you that, hey, you're fine here. What would it be like to just be here without needing to change anything or do anything? And you kind of start dropping into that, but then your mind's like, this is boring. Or like, oh, I can't do this. Or this
am I doing it right? I think I did it
Am I
right.
doing it
I think
right?
I got it. Am I enlightened?
It's like, whatever it is. So I'm going to guide you a practice that's going to be super aware that the mind could be doing that. And if you see the mind doing that at any point, you're just going to love up that mind, because that's already called getting more perspective. That's already the movement of meditation is beginning to kind of notice that. So I'll do 10 minutes. It'll be pretty quick. And as I'm doing it, I invite you to either open your eyes or close your eyes. Some people it really has to do with how comfortable you feel. So if your eyes open feels a little too exposed, then you just close them. If having them closed feels like you're going to go into drifty, drooly, dreamy land, then you can open them and just look at the ground in front of you.
And if you fall asleep and snore, we will not judge you.
We will not judge you. Maybe you just needed a nap today. So the first thing to do is, this is the main thing. Don't make a big deal of this. So breathe out any uptightness. The part that's going like, I'm going to meditate now. I have to get it right. I like to start with a few. Breathe in. Breathe out. As I'm breathing out, I actually take a little moment to smooth out the worry lines in the forehead and loosen the jaw. So the out breath is kind of a little bit of that parasympathetic relaxation. You can relax the shoulders. Basically, the more relaxed your body, the more relaxed your mind can become. If your body's rigid or tight, then that's often a sign that there's a lot of thinking, or it creates thinking too. So, another out breath. And now, here's the invitation. First of all this stuff is happening in this moment. There are sounds, maybe of the vent or the hum of a fridge. There's sense of presence of people around you. Of course, my voice. So start out by just making this commitment. I'm not going to get uptight about all that. I'm not going to brace against anything. So softening through the front of the body. Any sounds, it's like they're just floating right through you and past you. And the same goes with your body. You're going to have body sensations, maybe a knee you'll feel, or some ache from earlier. It's all right. Whatever's in the body's here. Whatever moods are here. That's fine. Whatever thoughts. So this commitment at the beginning to not fight with your experiences actually the ground of practice. You're just going to be open, available to whatever happens. From this place, it can be helpful just to choose something really simple to kind of lightly pay attention to. It's sort of like you're just riding this thing for a little while as things get settled. Give yourself something to do. That could be just the sensation of the soft feeling of your breath at your nose or at your belly. Could be the sound. Could be tingling in your fingers. The mind will be like, that seems kind of boring, or maybe I'll find a better thing. It's all just stuff happening in reality. So just you choose something. There's no hierarchy. And then idea is just to, how into this simple sensation or sound can I get for a few minutes? Really listening or really feeling. You know, there's a trick here about getting still. Get kind of still and poised. The more still you are, the more subtle the sensation. It kind of becomes a little more granular, so you can, sound gets a little fuller, or the feeling of the breath, you notice the subtle softness a little more. And you're just playing with that. Of course, thoughts are there. Mind wanders, you think about the list, or going over here, you go, oh yeah, you remember, you come back to this simple sensation. And it's sort of an opportunity to take a break, just do something very simple. Think of it as like a healing balm for your mind, just to rest with a sound or rest with a feeling in the body. So you let the thoughts kind of be in the background, and in the foreground you recommit to this simple sensation, this patient. And you could check into, what is the attitude of the mind right now? Are you like really kind of tense in the face and you're straining to do this? And if so, can you just kind of back off and relax a little bit? Or if you're kind of like stern and judgy, maybe like, I don't like this. Or you're kind of dreamy, drifty. So you have the capacity, your awareness, to notice whatever's here. And you kind of pop out of that and see, oh yeah, that was here. Noticing what it's like to be aware. And recommitting to this simple, soft sound or sensation. If there's any uptightness in the body or tension, just breathing out again, loosening a bit. What we're cultivating here is this capacity to be centered and aware in the middle of your life without needing to change anything. And sometimes we can slip right into that place and be like, oh yeah, okay. I can just sit here and it feels peaceful, not dramatic, simple. And other times it's really hard because there's a lot of feelings, distractions, intensities. That's fine. That's what I call it, a practice. Can we be with all that stuff too? However you are is exactly right, because it's how you are in this moment. Accepting that. And truly, that is a rest, a deep rest. That's just a few simple pointers. Sometimes I think of a practice like this, it kind of can also show us what's my default habit? Where do I go to? Things get still and simple. Am I more on the daydreamy style? More about thinking plans? More agitation? There's always something. It's kind of a litmus test, place to begin from. Those things can start to work themselves out through a simple seated practice, but also through these other paths in different ways. But here we are, sitting, doing nothing together. It's kind of holy. In a room on Nantucket, harbor's just off in the distance. You've never been to this moment before. It's the freshest one of your entire life. You just popped up inside it like a seal in the harbor. Breathing in that air. It's the first time you've ever done that in this moment. Each moment is like we're vertically rising up into our life. All right, when you're ready, a couple big yawns. No need to stifle it anymore. Oh, man. You open your eyes, come back into space, and that's the high excitement of meditation. You did it here. That's about as exciting as it ever gets.
That was excellent.
And my hair is all blown back.
Thank you for taking us through that. I feel like it's important that there's some frame of reference, especially
Absolutely.
for folks that might not have had that opportunity.
We're going to have a chance to do sharing and questions at the end, too, about that,
Absolutely.
because a lot of people find something like that highly underwhelming.
Or
So-
overwhelming. I mean,
or overwhelming.
I
yeah.
think, when I first started dabbling in meditation, it's like you're opening the hood of your car and you're seeing what's going on that you're not even fully aware of all the time. It's an opportunity to check in and say, wow, this is happening all the time.
Yes.
And it's going unregulated.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about benefits. What are some tangible takeaways people can, experience as a byproduct of having a practice?
I mean, there's the ones that we hear about a lot in the magazines and the scientific papers, and I think most people have kind of heard that already. It's lowered blood pressure, all the kind of markers of health, better sleep, better interpersonal relationships, lower cortisol, all that kind of stuff. And
More space. That's how I describe it.
yeah.
And then everything comes out from that. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like the baseline. And that's also a lot of people's entry point because, for someone who's very, very practical, who has a lot of stuff going on, it's kind of like, why would I do this thing? And to say, here's a bunch of things that your doctor will be able to measure, that can be a gateway in, right? But there's obviously other things ranging up to spiritual experiences and kind of, experiences of interpersonal oneness, you can call it, and then in a really kind of interactive sense, for whatever you're doing in life, I'm a creative, and meditation is the kind of thing that makes me more creative, gives me more ideas, gets me into flow state much more easily. And, you can kind of get over that hump of doing things very inauthentically, and you start to have a real authentic voice creatively, and Jeff can speak to some of the mental health benefits as well.
Yeah, I just think about my life. I have 2 young kids. One's almost 4, and he's a handful. Let's just say I apply my meditation skills every single moment when I'm hanging out with them, and another one who's just over 1. And when I make time for a short practice, first of all, I'm more available to the people in my life. I can see where my wife's at. I can see where my friends are, where my kids are at. Instead of me in my idea of what I think needs to happen or whatever, it's like, okay, wait, what's actually going on here? So it's like being able to actually have real connection with somebody. And everything flows out from there, because then I'm not in these giant stories, causing these stress hormones to shoot through my whole body and all the whatever, like that I'm just spinning out in all the time. It's like, so more peace, more calm, more connection, more creativity. My intuition is there online. Wait a second, what actually needs to happen in this moment? Maybe not this idea of what I think needs to happen, but something else that I'm seeing is right here in the space with me that I never would have noticed operating from my preoccupations, So what the benefits are is everything. I mean, from my experience is that you get your life back. You get life. It's not, and because then and it can be applied to everything, whether you're surfing or whether you're sailing or whether you're painting or whatever you're doing, whether you're having a conversation or you're dancing, like you're just now, you're there for it. There isn't to say there isn't a wonderful place in life to be off in a trance. That's just one of the other many beautiful flavors you can have in life. But this gives you an option to locate yourself in the middle of your life. And like I can't even, the benefits are so innumerable, they're tedious to describe.
Right. And if you could speak to, because I think a lot of individuals they're intimidated. It's a mysterious kind of pursuit, and it's also one in which, if you're an especially busy person, you feel almost incapable of cracking into that. What are some ways to start a practice because I think that first step is an important one, and oftentimes you sit down and try to sit for 10 minutes, it can just totally throw you for a loop. So what are some tips you'd give to starting a practice in a way that can kind of welcome you in and be one in which encourages you to take that next step?
Sure. Well, I like to get people to start where they are. It's like, what do you already do that you enjoy that gives you some sort of joy or pleasure, whether it's sailing or walking on the beach or playing with your dog or whatever it is. And just like, it's a lot about the basic skills of practice. Like, what would it be like to, okay, I'll do this, but stay a little bit more aware, just lightly more aware. Like, notice when I'm going off into drift land, but I'm going to just stay here, stay connected to the smells, the tastes, like stay in my senses, like begin to build a practice from what you already do. And then I would say, I think it's not a bad thing to try out. Can I sit for 5 minutes and not need to like suddenly fix everything or change the channel? What would that be like? Can I notice that any discomfort that comes up? And don't make a big deal of it. Like, I got to get it right. That's going to destroy everything. I got to get it right. I got to do this right like everything else. No, just, just making it like super low hanging fruit. Just like hang out, try 5 minutes. I mean, I like the apps because, it's crazy. At first I hated the apps because phones are the end of civilization. At least the distractibility. But now I'm on them. And I can see the value of just like having a 5-minute practice or a 10-minute practice. Just you have a structure, you find someone whose voice you like, you can kind of do a little bit more and weave it into your life that way. Then if you're getting into it from already and you're feeling like you're noticing the benefits from just that little bit, then you look around. Hey, can I invite a few friends to do it with me? We hang out for half an hour together, we meditate, or 10 minutes together, or you find a community. And but it should be in school. I think it should be in every single school, and it's starting to be more and more. And like something of just like learning the basics of self-regulation and how to manage your attention is so fundamental. It's like mental fitness that it's barely ever in the curriculum, and now it's. But those are some ideas, and then you may have others.
I like to think of, I think of different kinds of frameworks of approaching meditation, and we were talking about this earlier today. there is not just one way to do it. What Jeff gave us is a very easy entry level kind of thing. So if you're at a loss completely, try that, or
But it might still be super hard.
yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of the instructions,
Yeah,
right? Simple, not easy. Yeah.
Simple.
But one way to kind of think of all the different practices, and like I put them in kind of 3 different baskets. It's like body practices, expressive practices, and mind practices, right? So the mind practices are the ones that we see the most and refer to as meditation. And it's like sit there, find your mind, look at your mind, rest your mind, whatever. And a lot of people find that very difficult, especially in this day and age where all of us have varying levels of ADHD and 17 too many things to do. So that feels really uncomfortable and can be not a great place to start. So, Jeff was saying start where you are with what you like. Are you a person that fidgets a lot and needs a lot of movement? You can try a body practice, and that could be, something like yoga, which a lot of people already do, but turning that yogic practice into an awareness practice, so it's not just, or going to the gym, going for a run, surfing. Chances are you do it right now as a way to work out or get stress out of your body, but can you reorient towards it being a practice of awareness, getting into a flow state, being really mindful of how your muscles are moving, how the in-breath feels when you're working out or something like that. If you're a very creative person or, a writer, musician, visual artist, then the expressive practices can be a way in. And those are things like, journaling, art, breath work fits into there, dialectical kind of practices with another person. So bringing your awareness to that, we do, in my lineage, we do practices like just focusing on where the breath falls in your body and modulating it a little bit. Like, how does it feel different when I breathe into my belly than if I breathe into my chest? You're almost kind of running experiments on your own self and seeing how that regulates you, how you feel in the mind. And that can just, by way of doing something that you're already kind of interested in, start to attune you to the way that the mind works. So it's almost kind of like, these practices are like technologies that you're kind of using to look at your first person experience. And so in that way, it's like find something that you're already pretty proficient at. If you like to move your body, what does it feel like when you make these general movements, things like that. So I like to use that as a general framework for people to find something that's for them, and also to give you permission to try something that your friends are not trying, or, if your spouse tries one kind of meditation, you have different nervous systems, so yours may look very different. So I think that's one way to approach it at the very beginning.
And in that early stage, I think that a big question that at least I ask myself, and I probably still ask myself, is, am I doing this right? Like, am I doing this right? Is
yes
this,
and no.
Right. And I think there's also, Jeff, you touched upon it, there's, especially in this society, we're goal-oriented people. And so we're like, I'm going to nail my 10 minutes,
Yeah.
But in reality, that's not the goal, really. It's more the journey than the destination. What are some mindsets you think would reinforce that ethos as you begin a practice?
Well, I mean, that's why I had to do something called the Do Nothing Project on Sunday nights, where we just go onto YouTube and I pop up and I'm like, hey, let's do nothing together. And I'll guide a simple practice, but it's kind of inspired by there's a kind of Zen approach called just sitting, and where you just sit and you just do nothing. And all you're doing is sitting and just noticing every time that you are doing a subtle doing. So the doing might be like, I'm trying to get better at meditation, or the doing might be, I'm deliberately thinking about this because I don't want to sit here and do this. You notice that, you stop doing that. Or you stop doing that. And then you're just hanging out, and it's very simple. And then a more subtle doing comes in, like you're trying to be a meditator. Now you're doing the performance of meditating, So it's like there's so many fun ways of kind of hacking this, but I like to start with doing nothing. Make it like anyone can do nothing, but no one can do nothing. It's really hard to do nothing, but also don't make it any more than that. Just sit, do nothing, and then just see what happens. Don't make a big deal of it, and just sit. And some people can just drop right into that, and it's like they're already you're in a meditation already. If you're having trouble with it, your mind wandering, you notice, you come back, that's meditating. The wandering and coming back is the meditation. So realizing that you're already doing it right. There is no doing it wrong. That is the process. The process is wandering, coming back, trying to notice ever subtler ways in which you're not showing up. Like you can kind of just I try to demystify everything and just be like, it's about being aware of how you are as a human in this moment. and then just repeat. But then doing it with people, friends, and like normalizing the struggle, the challenges of it, that also makes a huge difference. I mean, I'll be curious to hear what other people in here think about that, what helped them over the hump, or what helps them make it more approachable. But that's another thing. Do it in community, then share reports. Oh, this is what I do. Oh no, this is what I do. That doesn't work for me, but this works for me. Yeah.
And I think something too is that, when we try to get it right with practice, what are we trying to get right? We're trying to get the actions, like I sat, I didn't move, I sat for 10 minutes and then I got up, or like my mind didn't wander once, right? So it's all these kind of things that are external to the actual looking, like all these things that we try to do. If it's a sitting meditation, you're sitting to calm your body so that you can look at your mind and to kind of see where a thought's happening, kind of what kinds of things are arising from me, right? So there's nothing special about the act of sitting. It's just that if that works for your nervous system, it helps you tune in. There's also nothing special about the act of doing a walking meditation or a yoga meditation, So if you try out different practices, you kind of see that they're pointing inward to something that beyond the practice, right? So that can kind of help loosen the ties of trying to get it right, because you can do two different meditations that are actually totally look opposite but are pointing at the same inner experience.
And let's talk a little bit about the mind and like a before and after. The before being the operating system that we all go by on a day-to-day basis, where there's very little, if any, space between our mind and us, versus the after, which could be the mind being a tool that isn't running us, but can be applied to things. And I think in terms of takeaways, this is one that's compelling to me, is most of us don't even know how much our minds are on top of us and running us. And they don't even know the possibility that the mind can somehow be a tool for us that we use to our advantage.
Yeah, so it's kind of like there's stages. You can think of it in like 3 stages. The first stage is you're just in your life. And the thing is, if you're happy and content in your life, you're settled, you feel like you're connected to things, like you probably already have a kind of meditation practice going in your own way. Everyone's got their own life to live, and you kind of find your own path. But if you're unhappy or you're struggling or you're feeling alienated or whatever it is, that can become the beginning of a kind of inquiry or a journey or an interest, where you begin to look at this, and then one of the first big insights is how unconscious you've been, how much you're just a victim to all these thoughts pouring through, how every moment you got to fix things or change things or whatever it is. So that's the kind of first very sobering stage. And even if once you're able to notice that, you're already kind of in the second stage, which is you begin to get this place where you're starting to get perspective. You're in it, you're lost in it, you come out, you notice something, you're lost, you come out, you notice something, but you're beginning to get space, and it's like, that's the classic kind of, the meditator's you're over here, you're the observer, and then your mind's happening over here, and sometimes life's happening over here. So it's actually only like a halfway house. It's a trap, actually, and that you do see a lot of meditators that get kind of stuck in this place where they got issues with living, and they just kind of, it's hard, and they just want to get over here where they're protected, and they end up in a kind of place that's almost dissociated, or and so this is a valuable stage, and part of there's always a stage for efforting, for working, for feeling like you don't know what you're doing, for getting it wrong, for being totally confused, for coming to this thing, randomly listening to this weird ass meditation thing. Oh no, okay, that was fucking weird. Get out of here. Then you try it over there, and all of a sudden you're sitting on the beach and something happens, and just your life is going to carry you in its weird organic way to whatever resolution it's going to carry you. But so what I'm describing is the path that kind of happens over a lifetime. But from this place of having a little more perspective about how you're, whether it's through journaling or through meditation, there can then be this third piece, this third stage, you want to call it that, which is sort of the integration, which is that you actually come back into your life. You have more just general awareness around the thinking is there, the feelings, everything's still there, you're in it, you're in life, you're feeling, you're available and connected to things happening around you more. And it's sort of like you end up where you began, but now with a lot more ease, a lot less suffering. My teacher frames it as happiness independent of conditions. That's not me, but it's just a long process. I'm still young. I'm going to keep going and sort of try and not try and all that stuff. But it's sort of like your conditions are all the things that you think need to be a certain way. The conditions of your mind, the conditions of your body, the conditions of life. We're in a world that has all these major issues. Who wants to be happy inside that when everything else is going off, But that's what it means is a capacity to be centered and available to the real challenges of life and integrated and part of it and connected to it and not hiding out over here or you're inside it. And that's kind of how I see the journey of practice. And maybe you might describe it a little bit differently.
Like whatever Jeff's just said, I agree. But I always like analogies and metaphors because that, I'm an artist and I want to see it in my mind. But a really nice metaphor, I think, for those 3 stages are, when you were learning to ride a bike, there was the time when you couldn't ride a bike and like if somebody passed you one and you got on it, you would immediately fall off, right? And so there's this like, that's the unconscious state where there is no sense of mind or, observer and observed. There is just the not being able to do it, not being able to look, not being able to do this experiencing. And then you start to learn, but the learning looks awkward, right? You get on the bike and you're like, don't talk to me, I'm pedaling, is it left foot and now it's right foot? And, so that's not where we stay. That is kind of there's the bike, there's the rider, and there's the riding, and they're all very separate and mechanical. And that's the section in between that he's talking about where we're over here and the practice is over here and I'm here listening to my mind, like you were saying, we're being ridden by our mind or whatever. But at a certain point, you just ride the bike. It's you and the bike, you're fused and you're going in the same direction and you're pointing towards the same thing and it feels joyful and the wind's blowing in your hair, right? So that's kind of like a peak moment or kind of when something clicks for you, And so, you were asking like, what is the mind or what are we talking about when we say mind? And I like to think of it as like, rather than a me versus my mind or me versus negativity or this cloud of thought, broaden the whole thing. It's like mind is like a stage or mind is like the space in which everything is arising. The thoughts that are bugging you, but also your concept of being a self, thinking these things, right? Everything is arising. And the more that you can kind of like open the aperture of your experiencing or, the more you're taking in, and the less you're identifying with any one thing occurring in your mind. So it's that spaciousness. And I think that's where you're talking about, where it's kind of like happiness, what did you say? Happiness independent of conditions, right? Because all the conditions are arising anyway. Your thoughts are still there. There's this things that you have to do and the nagging and whatever, it's still there, but you're seeing it as a things that are arising in the space of the mind, and same thing goes with your sense of self. It's a construct arising in the space of the mind. And so of course we change, my concept of myself is different now than it was 10 years ago, than it was when I was 5 years old, because it's an ever-changing process occurring in this spacious place, and so the more you can just be with and one with that space. I know that sounds very esoteric. It's hard to put in words.
But when you hear what words on it, you're like, you then make a concept out of it. You think it's this dramatic thing, and people are like, they think it's going to be like psychedelics, like the peak of a psychedelic experience. It's going to be this, and there can be these really interesting things happen. But it's also it's just having more space around your life as it is now. Mm-hmm. Space is a really good way to describe it. It's like, that's the beginning too. There are deeper gradations. There are great meditation masters, of which I am not, who can describe even more broadly how that space begins to feel. But for my experience, it's just been more ease, more suppleness, fluidity, space, time to enjoy, to stop, and whatever's happening is intrinsically interesting all on its own. There's no dissatisfaction guiding every moment. There's just this place of being more available to what's here, and it's very hard to talk about this, because it is the mystery. This has always been the contemplative problem, that it's so paradoxical to try to point to. It is a shift, like a figure ground reversal for how you been maybe been living your life before, and it's so that is real. But sometimes the movement into that is very, very, very slow and gradual. It's like a lobster getting boiled; you hardly know it. Sometimes it's more dramatic, but you trying to articulate the subtlety of it is like it's very hard for our language, which is kind of dualistic, to do that. It's hard, and for me, I feel like I'm still learning. You know, I get glimpses that are deeper all the time around. Oh, I still see how I'm being a subject and I'm putting things in two boxes. Like there's a world, and then there's me, and then there's things I'm trying to make happen in the world. I notice all the time how I'm doing that. I never even had any clue of that 30, 20 years ago. So it's more and more. There's more space around seeing that, but I can really see what will happen as that begins to collapse. That there's just even more flow and ease and mystery, and this is something we do at the podcast is we interview a lot of people about this, about more experienced practitioners, people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, like how they, but also 20s, 30s, 40s, like how they experience the effects of what practice has given them. And it's, to me, I never get bored of hearing people attempt to articulate the mystery of that, because it's the mystery of living, and it's what it is. I mean, my teacher Shinzen used to say it beautifully. He said, you can get the answer. The big answer to why we're here, like what this is about, it has an answer. You live the answer. You become the answer. That question no longer has meaning. That's mind-blowing to me that is the case. There are certain things, like from a philosophical point of view, you think, okay, this is just insoluble. And you think, if you're an intelligent person with a certain amount of capacity, you get to the point you're like, oh, these are the questions that are impossible. Well, contemplative practice says, no, actually, you can go deeper. These questions they're answerable, but you live the answers. Not to say there isn't still lots of mystery, but that mystery of who you are, how you're connected to the world around you, that has an answer.
Do you think it's the case, because it is so hard to articulate, is it the case that what we're working towards in a practice is kind of trying to reverse time to get back to a childlike view of the world in which everything is new, there's no stories associated with it, you're experiencing, like you said, moment to moment, and you don't have a real sense of yourself. It's kind of
with the sober, centered, mature.
Yeah, no, I don't mean, yeah,
Well,
exactly.
in a way, it's coming back to the metaphor we just had, of the being unconscious, then working through it and having kind of like a distance, and then this kind of coming back together synergistic thing. Childhood is idyllic, but there's lots that we don't know. We weren't enlightened as children. We were free, and we were unburdened.
But we had no consciousness of our freedom.
Yes, that's
this
right.
is about being
we were
conscious
free,
of
but
freedom.
unconscious of that, right? And you can see that in the child, there's a lot of joy, but as a child, you can't solve the world's problems. It's hard to give compassion to other people in a way that can actually help them. These are just some examples of things that we might get to, right? And you can have, maybe for most of us, it's like middle life where we're pushing and pulling and trying to find the fix and trying to get back to childhood, but also trying to get wise. And, there's therapy and meditation and all sorts of things. And this is not necessarily mapped onto a timeline of age, of course, but the coming full circle is like a childlike wonder with awareness, with real ability to affect change in the world and interpersonally, and not just for yourself but for the ones around you. And so it's a bit of both.
But that's the thing too. I mean, you think of the world with all of its problems, to be able to be more centered and available to meet that problem head on, to look at say an issue, and to not be inside your reaction, which is certain that this is the thing that needs to happen, and instead be able to like see that reaction come up and park it and say, but what's actually happening here? That's the best of humanity, to be able to do that. That's the kind of response that you need to the world's challenges. Not, again, I have a teacher, Shinzen Young, he's got all these great, his line is that, all the world problems come down to reactivity one way or another. He calls it the waxy buildup. You get like someone says something. Think about this in a relationship. You just start a new relationship, and everything's like you're in that kind of like fresh novelty mind. Oh my God, I love you so much. It doesn't matter what you do, and you're looking across the table at them, and he's this beautiful, handsome fellow, and he's chewing his steak with this big like cow like and you're like, it's so charming and cute and so manly, and then like 2 years in a relationship, you're like,
he
chews like a cow, and it's like a little bit of waxy buildup, and then it's 4 years, and you're just like, I can't. Why listen to that guy chew that again? And then it's like divorce. 5 years later, you're like, I can't even look at you. It's the waxy buildup. It builds and builds, that reactivity that towards that just like coats our relationships, And it's like
Ossifies
happening all around the world. You can't have a conversation between two countries because there's so much waxy buildup, so much rage and anger and histories of injustice. And it's like everyone's acting from inside their reactivity. And it's like pinballs, just everything getting, and that's what's happening with the freaking climate. That's what's happening with the earth. It's like we're so unconscious and reactive in our own stuff that we're not even noticing what's happening all around us. So, okay. What's actually happening here? Can I put my own agenda, my ego to the side and meet this person, this conversation, this situation? Can we all do that? That's the place in which solutions come from. That's the great creativity generator. It's not from inside your fear and aggression. So that's
I mean, what comes to mind is a quote from, I think it's in Dan Harris's book, The 10% Happier, where he talks about how bringing your focus back to the breath is like a bicep curl for your brain. And so because I think that one of the big hurdles that a lot of people have in a starting practice is thinking it's a little too woo-woo for me. It's not, I'm more of a kind of tactician and logical and rational. But in reality, it's sharpening a lot of skills that our minds equipped with naturally, but they're not getting taken to the gym.
One thing that I was going to say is one of my teachers, Alan Wallace, put it in this really great way, which is that, like you said, like practice is like building a muscle, or one analogy that he gave, it's like you're building a telescope, right? With every practice that you do, it's like you learn, you're building the muscle or the technology to look deeper and more accurately, right? But you could point that at anything. So just being able to stop and calm your nervous system and look doesn't necessarily, it's kind of like ethically neutral. Then you could turn that state towards something great, helping people, or you could turn it towards like, let me be very absorbed in building this bomb. It could go either way. It's just technology. But then you orient it towards something that's has at its core the desire to be better, feel better, act better, be more together with people, right? And so that's when the muscle, you go to the gym and you do curls, bicep curls, but what are you using those muscles for? And that's when you really start to see some change in your life and in your habits. It's turning that awareness, that muscle that you have now, at something, or be it the mind or your own unconscious habits or interpersonal problems and things like that.
Yeah, I have a favorite muscle. Agree with all that. I have a favorite muscle. And people talk about the muscle of concentration. Your mind wanders, you come back, and that's definitely great for building flow, the capacity to get absorbed in your work. That's a great muscle. There's, of course, the muscle of care, of like learning to care for yourself, for the people around you, learning to care to do things well. That's a muscle. There's the muscle of being more clear, of just noticing, oh, this is happening right now, and just that kind of a clarity, or like the resolution dial. That's a muscle. But my favorite muscle is the equanimity muscle. And I can do a little like 1 minute thing now, just to kind of, the equanimity muscle to me is like, if you just activate this muscle for the rest, just whenever you remember it for the rest of your life, you will have a deep spiritual practice that will take you into an encounter with the real. You will. To me, it's like the super juice of meditation and practice. And what it looks like, and I'll try to guide people for a second in just the feeling of it. Equanimity is like it's the not fighting muscle. It's the no push and pull muscle. So if you think right now, just breathe out and just close your eyes for a second. And I kind of oriented this at the beginning of my guided practice, like just my words are flowing out, blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And there's the sound in the background. Just what if you just like totally soften to the front of your body? So there's no bracing. It's almost like when you go into cold water and right away there's like this tenseness in the cold water. What if you just breathe out and absorb the cold? Let the cold go through you. Let the sounds go through you. This openness, just surrendering to what's here. Not the ego, your desires, they're like a little contraction. I want to do this. And a little tightening, just untighten, loosen. Again, just breathe out again. The thoughts, every thought that contracts in judgment is a contraction. Just, okay, let that thought be there. What if I just, it's like, feel the edge of your skin. What can you do to let go so that they feel more, your skin feels even more porous? Like you breathe out and just, you're loosening. And you can imagine, you can even try this, just gently lifting up with your eyes closed, gently lifting your hand, kind of floating your hand like you're doing this little hand floaty thing. You can keep an equanimity going when you're moving, just gently. And then if you just slowly open your eyes, you're kind of going into life, you're checking stuff out, and you're turning your head, you're having a conversation. You can open your eyes now. You're moving your hands, but you've got this openness through the body. You're not rigidly trying to control reality. You're just flowing along with things. And if you're really open and receptive, then Dan says this thing, and it's okay. You check this out. You go, what's happening over here? It's this feeling of just sort of surrendering to life as it is. And then when you need to make a sudden, decisive, decision, you got more energy to like to say no if you need to say no. I'm not going to do that. That sounds like crap. So maybe that's what was coming up. That's my meditation on equanimity, everybody. If you got enlightened, you can send me an email and say, high five, appreciate it, thank you. I especially like the no.
I do want to open up to questions in a second. So be thinking of your question. I'll ask one to give you a second to kind of ponder that. You did mention enlightenment, and I'm wondering, how would you define kind of that awakening, that enlightenment, that like what are we going towards?
Nope. Nope. Not gonna do it.
Not even gonna try.
No, I think we would both be doing everybody a disservice. A, because we're not enlightened. B, because.
But what are people talking about?
Well, I would hope that they're not trying to describe it. I think okay, here's the thing. If you try to put words to it, either you're gonna try and look for that exact experience, or you're gonna say, well, that sounds cool, but I don't need that, right? So whatever it is, whatever we're talking about is something so personal that it doesn't make sense to anybody else, and so interpersonal that it's not put in wordsable.
And that is the classic response is often a version of that, because it's as soon as you try to articulate something about it, you collapse it into a concept. It becomes, that happened to me for years as a practitioner. My teacher describing these and how his moment-to-moment experience was, and I would immediately kind of create a concept out of it. But however, because I'm a journalist initially, I will try and just to say, I'll say a few words about it, because why the hell not? The way I think of it is, there's reality and you are reality. You're part of reality, but you yourself, the person experiencing, is reality experiencing. Everyone here is reality experiencing reality from this local place. So in my mind, we can wake up to that. And that's what practice is a movement towards. It's a movement towards that recognition. That's what that self-realization, that realization, oh shit. Mm-hmm. I thought I was just this little trying to I'm a squirrel trying to get a nut. I'm like, put my nuts over here and doing this over here. And then you realize your reality trying to get a nut. And then you're like, well, why should I collect nuts? Because I'm reality. So I think it's like expanding out to really understanding your true identity, your true self, your no self, which is not, you're in an ego, you're inside a body, mind doing stuff, but you're just the local version of reality doing that. And you can live from that place. I know lots of people live from that place. And the more you practice, the more that kind of gets in your cells,
And I would say, if anything that he just said makes you intimidated or makes it feel like something that is not for you, then that's not the definition for you. Yeah. Because I would say, like, I remember when I was in high school, and that's when I started reading, books by like Zen masters. And I remember, reading the term like no self. And I simultaneously was really excited to practice, but I became terrified, because I was like, I like myself. I don't want to be a no self. Like, I'm unique and I'm fun and I want to do crazy things in the world. And the idea of kind of like that disappearing or becoming something else, I had a strong reaction against it. And so the only reason I'm hedging is not because it's not something that you should look for, although it's also not a goal-oriented thing, so there's nowhere that you get. Because you're already aware. It's like you come back full circle and you're just living in your life and you're just being you. I guess on a practical level, you're experiencing a lot less like pain and discomfort. There's that. But, you know, there's going to be a lot of different ways to say it. And if any one of them sounds like it's not for you, that's not the description for you, because what we're talking about is there's a version for everybody and it's good.
And the universal truth of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's right here now.
It's right here, right now.
And you can realize it at any point.
But you are it.
It's not, it's happening at this very moment, and it's not something, because I think this is the conceptual misconception that we often have, is that we're climbing this meditation mountain to get to the view on the top, but in reality, the view's been in front of you the whole time.
You are the view.
You are the view.
You are the view.
And that's why we try not to put it in words, because that meant nothing.
All right. So with that in mind, why don't we open up to questions? And I can't see, so I might have to.
Anything goes.
Is anyone John?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you have a conceptual book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was highly agonized and neurotic when I wrote that, and I'm still neurotic. So, but no, I think of it in terms of writing as my framing for it is closing the authenticity gap. You know, it's sort of like the cliche gap, like where you there's a situation happening, and then I'm writing an article about the situation, and all of a sudden, I'm inside all the received thinking about it already. Like I'm in a sense, I'm operating the cliche layer. Like I don't really know what I think about what I'm writing about yet. I think I do, but it's not until I'm writing, and as you get going a little while, you realize, oh, there actually is a more interesting thing that I'm writing about here that I'm just learning what that is, or a real description of that situation is something much more interesting than what I'm trying to describe. But I had an amazing writing coach in Canada who used to say, whenever you're writing and you encounter some problem, there's some way you're trying to explain something and you're finding it impossible to explain. It's because, she says, make that problem part of the story. Whatever it is you're struggling with is the actual complexity of the thing itself that you don't even see. It's just an inconvenience because you're trying to do this other thing over here, but this is part of the story. So I feel like through meditation, it really benefits my practice. It allows me to kind of close that gap much more quickly, and I feel like I can get in a stream of what I really think about something or describe it more clearly.
I absolutely agree. And one thing I would add to that is, like, when you're doing any kind of art, and writing especially, because you're putting language has a really precise way of being. Everything in this moment is going into that, right? So the more that you're unaware of, the less mastery you have over what's going in, right? I'm writing down words, but my ego is in it. It's going to be in it anyway, and the pain in my butt's in there, and the thing I got in an argument about yesterday that's still over my head is in there. But if I have this broad awareness and I know that and I can see that, these become tools. Like you said, I can incorporate that into the story as a way of authenticity, or I can say, this is baggage right now that is not part of this story, and it's slanting my view. So your ability to be a master of the storytelling becomes much more precise, because there's not things hiding in the dark corners, or not as many things hiding in the dark corners that you don't know. And I think that's where the authenticity comes from.
I love how you put that.
I really like this happiness regardless of conditions, but everything that you're saying is about changing the condition in which you are in while these things are taking place. So if it's writing, you're putting everything that's in here out here in the word, and then you can hold that. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about the physical processes that take place, because that, like for me, the blue space I get into, it's always triggered by really long run, really long swim. Not so much by sitting still, although if I get really into the blue space, I'm like, oh, I can remember how to get there without actually going out on the run. So I'm really interested to hear you're initiating, which I think are changing the conditions, not keeping them the same. I don't know.
Blue space. That's how you describe that space for you. I like it.
Yeah,
That's a nice way to describe it.
Okay.
So like physical changes happening in the brain.
Yeah, I mean, even if you sit still, aren't there going to be like?
I mean, yeah, you're.
Oh, so you're saying like you're
in a process of nonstop change and living. That's
Yeah.
that's life.
And then, but you're interfering with that.
Yeah. So you're.
So what I would say, we call it practice for a reason, right? So it is artificial. And while you're practicing, let's say, you're removing yourself from life to sit and practice. What is important about that is that you are going back in again and again and learning a way to be removed from the triggers so that eventually when you're in the world, you are no longer triggered, right? So it's actually just a compassion to yourself to kind of simplify and be like, let me learn that here. Let me learn equanimity here among people who are accepting and who are all oriented towards that, rather than jumping in with a pile of people who hate me or trying to beat me and practicing equanimity there. That's a much more advanced practice, right? But at that stage, you're not trying to change the conditions anymore. You kind of have learned, you've built a muscle, like you said. So the practice is artificial. It's a doing and a changing, but it points towards being fluid in the world and not having.
I think it's a good, like the fluidity. I think of it as a kind of energy efficiency, that you are constantly changing, and now you're starting to practice being in a particular way. And what you're practicing is a kind of smoothness, an efficiency. You have ever seeing ever more of what's happening with in an ever simpler way, like including more and more in a perspective, and finding how you can be at ease with more and more kinds of situations and more kinds of intensities. And what I see happening in the nervous system is a kind of integration, a kind of efficiency. It's like stuck parts of the nervous system are still spinning out over here. It's like they start to harmonize and calm down, and things start to connect to everything else, and things start to work more efficiently in the mind and in the body, which is why you often hear lots of reports about people having less stress-related illnesses and less even chronic diseases. Even those kinds of change through practice, because as the whole system starts to settle and kind of harmonize and smooth out, then like all these kind of second order or downstream disorders that happen as a consequence of not being there, they don't have the same, they're not being fed in the same way. So I mean, is that answering?
A little bit, and but I just, sorry, I don't want to call it, I want to connect something. I was talking about doing this with a group, and like, we all are together doing this, and I'm like, wow, let's take off all our clothes, I would never do this with anyone else there, and I thought, that's fine, right? It is.
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. I think there's a lot of people like that actually.
I mean, there's the
probably many more who prefer to just do it on their own.
absolutely. What doing it with a group can do is that it's, for whatever reason, we're social beings. It seems to sometimes be easier to sit for longer periods in a group. So that's why, in a retreat setting, you'll go away, and for a week you kind of like synchronize practice, as it's called, right? But if you're just beginning, like when I was beginning, I did not want to. I was very, very self-conscious, and I was like, I'm not doing this with a bunch of woo-woos, and no way at all. So it could be something that you open up to at some point, or maybe it's something kind of, that you apply specifically to a specific practice. Like for example, there's, we have in Toronto, there's a ecstatic dance community, right? And that's really fun, and I wouldn't want to do that alone. It's essentially dancing wildly, like flailing in whichever way you want to do to music, and there's a joy that comes out of it that feels like you want to share it with other people. But if that's not the case, then do it by yourself. There's absolutely no requirement to do it in a group at all.
Yeah. I used to say in my retreats, community is the teacher, and there's a lot of people who are just on their own, kind of on the edge, just doing their practice. It's great, and there's people who are more kind of social. The one great thing about hearing, the best part, all the teachings come out of people sharing, people describing something with their experience or an insight or a challenge, and it's like, I mean, so much of my learning happened through listening to other people who are more articulate than I was, and going, that. Because it's so subtle and weird, when you're trying to start talking about this stuff.
And you feel put on the spot.
And you don't have a language for it, but you hear someone articulate something, and it's like, that is what happens with me. And then so that can be one of the benefits of it.
And an in-between is there are a lot of teachers and communities that offer teachings via Zoom, And that could be a nice gateway. You know, you can be in there, you can turn your camera off if that's okay with everybody else. And so you're getting the sense of community. You're getting the sense of what Jeff is talking about, like hearing other people's experiences and idiosyncrasies. And maybe someday you feel like turning on your camera or seeing these people in person. You know, I know plenty of people who do it that way, especially during pandemic. Like a lot of people, that was their gateway to meditation was, well, I can turn on Zoom. Let me check this out, you know.
Just put the video off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
So you've had a great analogy about bicycles, and oftentimes when you ride a bicycle, we have great wheels, right? And so, similar to athletes, you're always going to say you practice more by practicing and doing, but they also watch hundreds of hours of tape of other people playing, because that's the great way to learn is by watching experts. So, with this, in a very Western way, I'm asking what you guys think of things like the news, where you're training your brainwaves, or different apps that you think are particularly useful, like things like Timer or Pillow, whatever. What do you guys recommend as people are getting into this? I'm sure there's a bunch of people who maybe never meditated before, so that's not one of the resources for us. Just wondering.
Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like all those things. I actually know the Muse folks, and I think if it helps, try it out. I mean, all this is about just seeing what works. You know, everyone's so unique, and I think I was approached years ago by first by 10% Happier and eventually by Calm to start doing stuff for the apps, and I was like, there's no way. First of all, no, I don't really want to do that because apps, they're not going to be like a thing. It was my technological forecasting mind. You can see I hadn't maybe done enough meditation at that point. My intuition was faulty there. But the more I started to do it, actually, I mean, I get so many emails from people who really say it's incredibly helpful, you know. And what's good about the apps is there's very different voices, very different, like the 10% Happier app I happen to really like. And I think I have a whole bunch of free things that if someone emailed me, I can just give them to you for that if you want to check out that app. And it's got like Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg and Sebene Selassie and like all these really great. So you kind of find someone who you like the sound of their voice or their framing works for you. And I think it's useful to have that. I mean, just to be able to have a 5 or 10 minute practice on your phone. And I like Insight Timer too, because it's totally free. And there are lots of, now there's so many, there's like attrition in the field because it's so competitive and they're dropping out left, right, and center, blah, blah, blah. But so I think those are, all that stuff's good. Whatever's going to help you get going, you know, and that can kind of normalize it. And there's a lot of skillful means going into how to offer those things in a way that's accessible. Now, I'm not saying there's still issues around it, and there's still issues with having a phone in your pocket being your wisdom guide, but you know, you got to work with what you got.
Yeah, and I would add a couple more things. First of all, I think when you're beginning, or you know, anytime that you're unclear about a practice, or if you feel that your unclarity about practice is interfering with actually just doing it, guided meditations, whether that's an app, whether that's a teacher in person, a community, just take that off the plate of not having to guide it for yourself, you know, and there's a relaxation that comes with it about just doing. And so after a while, you get a proficiency where you're like, I think I could guide myself through that one. Another thing would be, which we're talking about tomorrow, and hopefully we'll see some of you there, is psychedelics. You know, a lot of people have had the experience where they tried meditation and nothing was really clicking, and then a really well-timed, well-guided psychedelic experience kind of like it's like when a physiotherapist is like, no, don't bend your back like this, bend it like this. And you're like, oh, that's how I do it. Right? So, and then you can take that experience and take it into a meditation practice, but you remember what you were pointing towards, you know, you remember what that mystery felt like or something like that, you know. But I would say, you know, if we're using the athlete analogy, at no point would the athlete just give away their path to like the trainer or the practice and just be like, I don't know, I'm just doing whatever this guy tells me, right? They're still the one with agency. And so in this path, you have to always keep that in mind, that, you know, you are your own guide or teacher. You're inviting other things into the path, whether that's a medicine like psychedelics, whether that's a guided app, whether that's, you know, following a specific teacher that you like for a while. Always keeping that sense of awareness at the center. Is it working? Do I feel safe? You know, is there some results? have I gotten all I can out of this path? So you're always kind of your own coach in that way. So I think if there's one thing that you should leave here feeling like, because we talked about so much, is that this should be fun. It should be joyful. There's no way to do it right, and a bazillion different ways to do it. So just do something. Yeah, just do it. Yeah. And if you get really lost, email one of us, and we'll tell you you're fine.
Thank you both for being here tonight, and check in tomorrow where this conversation will continue in the psychedelic path, which I agree is a great option as well. So thank you guys for being here, and